This is Joe Biden. As you know, old Joe is just a masterful storyteller. For example,
and Corn Pop was a bad dude, and he ran a bunch of bad boys. I was told, I don't know if it's true, I was the only kid in my era that I was able to walk across the lackey on that pipe that was just above the thing. If you fell in the lackey, you were a lackey, you were in trouble. But anyway, there's just one thing I could be known for as president. I would be the president who, during his era, ended cancer as we know it. But then last week, guess what? We also landed a rover on Mars.
And those are all great. But there is one story that Biden is very fond of telling because it concerns his favorite thing in the whole world, the National Railroad Passenger Corporation, otherwise known as Amtrak.
There's two conductors that Mr. Weaver will remember. One of them was a guy named Angelo Negri. And Angelo, there was an article, I guess my fourth or fifth year as vice president, saying Biden travels 1,300,000 miles on Air Force One.
So first, Biden referred to the vice president's plane as Air Force One, when it's Air Force Two. To be honest though, I'd be concerned if he didn't get it wrong, so it's fine. Second, he claims that it was reported that he had traveled 1.3 million miles as vice president by the fourth or fifth year. However, in September 2015, i.e. 6.5 years into his vice presidency, Biden said at an event in Davie, Florida, "I've traveled, as of today, 992,894 miles for the president." And in September 2016, Biden claimed that he logged 1.3 million miles of travel as vice president, but this isn't claimed on any official record. Biden simply claimed it as fact, and this reporter tweeted it out. So when Biden claims that he traveled 1.3 million miles 4 or 5 years into his presidency, he's off by a few years. Now you might be thinking, oh, Andrew, I'm sure he just got the year wrong when he told the story. This is low even for you. But hang on, there's more. A lot more.
The Secret Service didn't like it, but I used to like to take the train home. My mom was sick, and I'd try to come home almost every weekend as vice president to see her. And I was getting on the train, and Angelo Negri came up and he goes, "Joey, baby!" And he grabbed my cheek, started to squeeze it like he always did. And I thought he was going to get shot. I'm serious. And I said, no, he's a friend.
So this conductor, Angelo Negri, supposedly went up to Biden, pinched his cheek, and said,
"Joey, baby!"
And when that happened, Biden seriously thought that it was a legitimate reason for the Secret Service to shoot someone? I mean, come on. It's not like he was climbing through a window with a backpack.
He said, "Joey, what's the big deal? 1,200,000, 300,000 miles on Air Force Two. You know how many miles you travel on Amtrak?" I said, "No, Ange, I don't know." And he gave me the calculation. And he said, "You travel 1,515,000 miles on Amtrak."
So a couple things to unpack here. First, Joe Biden's mom died on January 8th, 2010, which was during Biden's first year as vice president. And that would be 5.5 years before he supposedly traveled over 1 million miles on Air Force Two. Second, the Amtrak conductor Angelo Negri, the conductor that squeezed Joey Baby's cheek, had retired in 1993. This is a photo from that year in Biden's Senate office with Joey Baby holding a cake that says, "Angelo, don't go." Now you might be thinking, well, Andrew, maybe Biden is confused. What else is new? And this conversation with Mr. Negri may have happened after Biden's mom died, and maybe Angelo Negri was on the train as a private citizen and just happened to see the vice president on the train. But if you're thinking that, you'd be wrong. Because again, Biden didn't hit that 1.3 million miles mark until 2016, and Angelo Negri died in 2014. Or maybe Biden had that conversation with Angelo's Force Ghost. It would explain why the Secret Service was so rattled. But fine, whatever. Biden told a story and got most, if not all of the details wrong. Big deal, he's old. But the problem is, to date, Biden has publicly told this story on at least 6 different occasions.
I'll tell you a real quick story. I shouldn't bore you with it, but I used to, the Secret Service didn't like it, but I used to like to take the train home. And I remember getting on the train, and a guy named Angelo Negri was from, you remember Ange? And so I walking up to getting the train on that Friday, and Ange walks up to me and he goes, "Joey, baby!" Grabs my cheek, and I thought the Secret Service was going to blow his head off.
After the first couple times telling this tall tale, Biden was fact-checked by Fox News and CNN. And it was proven that the story couldn't possibly have happened the way Biden told it. So despite being called out on it, Biden continues to tell the same debunked story over and over and over again.
Joey, grab my cheek. Joey, baby! Joey, baby! Joey, baby! Joey, baby! Joey, baby! What are you? And I thought the Secret Service was going to shoot him. I said, no, he's good, he's good. True story.
Now, the biggest issue with Joey Baby's story is his claim that he's traveled over 2 million miles on Amtrak.
Now, I know, I'm Mr. Amtrak. I've traveled over 2 million miles on Amtrak.
And this is Biden's biggest claim to fame, as if taking Amtrak is some amazing accomplishment. He rode to work on a commuter train. Wow, make him the president. And while he claims that he's traveled millions of miles by rail, the numbers just don't add up.
He said, Joey, big deal. 1,300,000 miles on Amtrak, on Air Force 2. You know how many miles you traveled on Amtrak? He said, 36 years in the Senate, X number of years at that point as vice president, average 131 days a year, 257 miles a day. Joey, you traveled over 2 million miles. Big deal. You know how many miles you travel on Amtrak, Joey? We estimated 127 days a year, 250 miles back and forth, 36 years, then as vice president. So how'd you get that, Ann? He said, well, 267 miles a day. We figured you traveled 119 days a year for 36 years.
As you can see, the details change each time that he tells the story.
250 miles back and forth, 257 miles a day, 267 miles a day.
And it should bother you that Mr. Amtrak, who regularly rode the train for over 4 decades, doesn't know how long the trip is. The round-trip train ride between Wilmington and Washington, D.C. is 220 miles. So he was way off.
He gave me the calculation, and he said, you travel 1,515,000 miles on Amtrak. You've traveled 2,100,000 miles on Amtrak. Boom, boom. You have traveled over 2 million miles, Joe. I don't hear any more about the Air Force.
And the big problem here is that if you do the actual calculation with the numbers that Biden provides, it never even comes close to 2 million miles. Here's an example.
267 miles a day. We figured you traveled 119 days a year for 36 years, and then you traveled as vice president. He goes, 2 million, I think it was 180, but 2,200,000 miles.
So by his calculation, 267 miles a day times the average of 119 days a year times 36 years would be 1,143,828. That means that Joey Baby would have had to travel over 1 million miles on Amtrak during the 8 years that he was vice president, and that's completely impossible. So how many miles did Biden actually travel on Amtrak? Well, let's do some math and try to estimate for ourselves. First, let's see how many days Biden averaged per year traveling back and forth.
He said we figure 117 days a year, 127 days a year. Average 131 days a year. You averaged 100, I think it says 21 days a year. We figured you traveled 119 days a year for 36 years.
Well, that was helpful, wasn't it? So why is the number Biden giving in the low 100s, you ask? Well, maybe because he wouldn't have traveled every single weekday from Wilmington to Washington, D.C. Senators are supposed to spend at least a little time working from offices in their home state, and this state work period is usually about 100 weekdays. Now, we know that the highest number of days that Biden said he averaged was 131 days a year. But let's be generous and say that it was 150 days a year. Multiply that by 220 miles a day and 36 years in the Senate, and you'll get 1,188,000 miles. Now, that's not including the time that Biden traveled on the train while he was vice president, and unfortunately we don't have a record of how many trips he took during that time. Let's be even more generous and say that Biden traveled to Delaware every single weekend while he was Veep. If so, that would only add 91,520 more miles for a grand total of 1,279,520 miles. And should we be surprised? I mean, this is coming from the same guy that claims that a $3.5 trillion spending bill costs $0. So, of course, his math is going to be completely wrong, which is consistent with everything Brandon touches. And on that note, that's it for now. Don't forget to pick up some Let's Go Brandon merch. Be sure that you're still subscribed to the channel. Thanks to Poofy for her help with this week's script. And as always, I hope to see you next time. If there is next time.